Alrighty, what's up? Welcome back to the PCC Podcast. And today I'm going to be talking to you guys about exactly how you can set, track, and adjust your own macros for fat loss. Now, this is going to be like a full tutorial of everything you need to know of exactly how to go about setting, tracking, and adjusting macros. Now, I will say and preface with, I don't recommend diving into macro tracking for everyone. And in fact, a lot of our clients don't start anywhere close to there, not because they're not capable, but because they've been that road before. They've been thrown a set of 3 numbers and been like, whoa, what the heck do I do with these? And so there's a lot of foundation building that we like to do first before we get into just tracking macros, because it is the most reliable and accurate way to guarantee that you see results, but it does take some knowledge up front. So this is for you if you feel like you eat balanced meals throughout the day and you just want to coach yourself beyond tracking your calories. This is a great next step, because a lot of times tracking your calories can get you, say, from point A to point B with weight loss, but then point B to C is dicey, right? Because you're like, I'm hitting low calories and I'm not getting anywhere. So this is going to be a really good tutorial as a whole. And you might find that it's surprising that you're going to be eating more than you thought you needed to. So let's get into it, because this might be a long one. So I hope not, but I'm going to try to keep it as tactical, plain, and simple as possible. There's a lot of nuances, caveats, asterisks, but I'll try to keep it short and sweet. So number 1, setting your macros first and foremost. So the first thing that I recommend that you do is, there's 2 ways of going about this. One is more accurate than the other. The first way is to track your entire intake for 1 to 2 weeks, so 7 to 14 days, on, say, a MyFitnessPal, a chronometer, a tracking app. Doesn't matter what it is, but make sure that it's a good tracking app, and 7 to 14 days logging everything that you eat without changing much. Like, you can make some changes, tweaks, whatever, but like typically you just want to see like, what I'm currently eating. And what we find is there's an inherent bias to like not eat quite as much when we start tracking, because we're aware of it. We're like, we don't want to face that with ourselves. Oh, I had 4 of those normally. I'm just going to have 2, right? Whatever it is. And so that's going to happen naturally, but just keeping in mind that you're probably going to find that you eat a little bit less as a whole. Don't beat up on yourself for that. It's fine. And then figuring out what your weight is doing over those 7 to 14 days. My preference is always 14 days, because then you can see like how your weight trends across 2 weeks. And you're going to want to weigh yourself daily through this beginning phase, and honestly through all of it. If you're going to coach yourself, you need as much data as possible. So every single day weighing yourself and looking at it from a weekly average standpoint. So not just what does my weight do, in sequence, but from week 1 to week 2, what was the 7-day average calculation of weight 1 to weight 2? And that can show you your weight is staying relatively stable, or your weight is actually increasing, or your weight is already decreasing. So this is for fat loss, right? So we're looking for that decrease. And so if your weight is decreasing, then don't change your calorie amount. And if anything, if it's decreasing by more than a pound, increase the calorie amount, because you can get away with eating a little bit more, especially when we tweak these macro ranges. It's going to be more advantageous for your body to make the most of the fuel that you're putting in. Now, if your weight is stable, I would also say keep the macros, keep the calories where they are. But if your weight is increasing, you're going to want to maybe reduce that by 10, 15%, depending on how much your weight increased. If it increased by 3 pounds in a week, probably shouldn't eat so much. But if it increased by, say, half a pound or something like that, I might just remove 100 calories off the top there, right? So it's a rough estimate, just some ballpark numbers I'm throwing out here. But the reason why you don't want to change your macros or change your calories, say, when your weight is stable for that test week, for that data collection week, is because when we switch the macros up, higher protein, moderate fat, moderate carbs, we're going to see that your body makes better use of all this stuff. You're probably going to lose some body fat from that change alone. So With that being said, there's another way to go about it. If you just have zero patience, this is a less accurate way to do it, but you can use multipliers. So taking your current body weight and multiplying it by 10, 11, or 12 to get a rough calorie amount in total that you can start with. Start with. I'm very, very clear. That is a starting recommendation. You're probably going to need to adjust. I would air high to start with multiplying by 12 and see how you feel from there. Because if you start low, you can only cut from there. And that doesn't leave you with a lot of options down the road. So 10 to 12, multiply, those are your calories, or the data collection way. Either's fine. When you have that calorie amount, then you're going to start tweaking from those total calories. What are your macros? So we're always going to start with protein. So there's kind of two categories that I would put this in, say under 50 pounds to lose, over 50 pounds to lose. If you have over 40, 50 pounds to lose, you're definitely going to want to set your protein based off of your target body weight, your target lean body mass. And then for your under 50 pounds to lose, I would say you could set this protein goal just off of your regular body weight right now, but just go a little bit on the low side if you have a little bit more weight to lose versus less. But if you're that person who was maybe like me when I first started my journey and I wanted to lose about 10 to 15 pounds of body fat, when really what I needed to do was build muscle, but we'll talk about that in another episode, you can start with your actual body weight for protein. So protein, you often hear 1 gram per pound of body weight. So the actual scientific literature is, I believe it is 0.8 to 1.2 grams per pound of lean body mass. So 0.8 to 1.2 grams per pound. And so let's kind of just put this into context. If I weigh 100 pounds, which I don't, but for easy math, let's try that. If I weigh 100 pounds, then 0.8 of that is going to be 80 grams of protein. 1.2 is going to be 120 grams of protein. So we're going to be a little below, little over target body weight here. So if you are in that less than 50 pounds of weight to lose group, just take your actual body weight. 0.8 times that is a great starting place for your protein grams per day. So if you weigh, say, 200 pounds, then 0.8 times your body weight would be 160. It's a lot of protein. It is a lot of protein, but that's a great place to start. If you struggle with that, start 20, 30 grams lower than that. Just get consistent and then walk it up from there. In addition, as you lose weight, you'll be able to lower that target a little bit, right? And if you have an easy time hitting that protein goal, then you can stick with 1 gram per pound. I wouldn't recommend over a gram per pound unless you're relatively very lean and you're potentially looking to put on muscle mass, or you are in a performance-based sport, then you might need more protein. Then from there, you're going to have your protein target. So once you have that, multiply that number of grams per day by 4. That's the number of calories that takes up. Subtract it from your total calorie amount. And then from your total calorie amount, let's set fat next, right? So fat next is typically going to be anywhere from 20 to 35% of your total calories. This is honestly more preference-based. So take a look. If you did the tracking method, this is where this also comes in handy. If you did the tracking method, go look at your carb versus fat split on your little pie chart in MyFitnessPal. What percentage of your diet was roughly fat versus carbs on a regular basis? And my recommendation would just be to start as close to that as you can, because then you don't have to change as much about your diet, right? And so if you say had 30% of your diet from fat and the other percentage from carbs, then I would just say take 30%, so 0.3 times your total calorie amount that you have calculated for yourself. And that is the calories from fat that you're going to want. So divide that number by 9, and that is the grams per day that you'll aim for. And then with that amount of calories from fat, you're going to subtract that from the total calories as well. And then what's left is you're going to have a chunk of calories left. That's going to go to carbs. So you're going to divide that by 4, and that's going to be the grams of carbs per day that you aim for. And that's it. That's how you set your macros for the most part. There are more advanced equations that get a little bit more granular in nitty gritty. But typically, as coaches, we are just taking the data that we start with here, and then we are adjusting it as we go with our clients, because nothing is a perfect science here. And we're really just looking for how the body is responding. Now, with that being said, you can adjust that, you can tweak that as you go, but I would just always make sure that your protein is in that range, and then your carbs and your fats you can play with, right? That's why sometimes people track a calorie range as well as a protein goal instead of carbs, fat, protein. Now, with that being said, how do we track this? So the biggest thing with tracking is that we're just trying to be as accurate as possible. So being honest about what we call BLTs, so bites, licks, and tastes, making sure we're honest about everything we're putting into our mouth and tracking it to the best of our ability, typically just overestimating a good bit when we go out to eat, adding an extra 10 grams of fat when we go out to eat because we are, because we are probably getting food that's been cooked and doused in oil. So at least 10 grams of fat added to that. And when we are tracking at home, trying to weigh it out in ounces and grams as much as possible, trying to weigh food as much as possible, honestly, rather than just estimating with our eyeballs, and using USDA verified entries. On MyFitnessPal now, there's a little check next to it. That's a great way to make sure that you're using the right food entries that will confirm accuracy. And when you have these macro goals, I'm going to just throw out some random numbers here just for sake of example. Let's say your protein goal is 120, your carbs are 200, and your fat is 50. So if that's the case, you don't need to hit those numbers on the dime. You can set a range. And this is something I've always done with clients, and it's always worked really well, is with carbs and protein, I will make the range 10 grams above and below that middle target. So if protein was 120, then the range that I want my client to hit protein is between 110 and 130. Gives you some room, some grace, right? Same for carbs, 190 to 210 instead of just 200 on the dot. And then for fat, a range of 5 above and below, because fat, as we know, is more calorie dense. So 50 is the target, 45 to 55 is the range around it. So I'm having people try to hit within that range for quote unquote adherence rather than on the spot. And that's going to ensure that we can be consistent while also still being flexible here and there, right? And then lastly, how to adjust our macros. How do we know when we're at a plateau and we need to change things? So just for sake of example, I have a client that has worked with me for over 3 years now. She's lost over 130 pounds. I adjusted her macros twice in the course of all that time. So it's less than you think. And the more you change things, the less you're going to see the result of it. Typically, what we like to say is you will see the result of the change that you made about 2 to 4 weeks after you make that change. And so if you're changing something every 2 weeks, you are constantly going to be wondering, where's my progress? Where's my progress? Because you're not waiting long enough. So when you are looking to, do I make a change? Number one, assess your adherence on all fronts. So are you adherent to the diet, the macros? And not only are you hitting within the numbers, but are you eating good, whole, nutrient-dense food sources to fill those numbers? And are you eating regular meals, like a regular default diet across the day? And then from there, let's look at weight trends, right? So the average to average, we're still weighing daily, and we're taking the 7-day average over time, and we're seeing how is that trend line moving? Is it angled down, even just slightly? And then if it's not, after 2 or 3 weeks of a total plateau on all fronts of that, progress photos, weight on the scale, measurements, and all qualitative things, then I would say 2 to 3 or even 4 weeks sometimes of that same plateau is when I will say, okay, we're at a plateau. We've been consistent. We're doing the things. Let's make an adjustment. And I would probably say to just remove 10% of total calories and remove them from carbs and fats, and then let that adjustment settle in, right? There's an adjustment period to stick with it, to get the numbers right, to make sure you got your meals all set. And then there's an adjustment to maybe you lose a little bit of water weight right off the bat, but then it's like waiting for that to set in, waiting for it to set in, right? And so basically making sure that you give it enough time to see that come to light. Another 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks might go by before you see the weight really kind of whoosh, flush out and actually see the result of that change. But that is really it. And most of the time, we're not at a plateau. We just have variables that are yet to be managed. So keep that in mind there. But that is pretty much the whole gist of it in terms of fat loss, how to set, track, and adjust your own macros. Now, if you would like a template for a tracker that we use for our clients to track their macros and assess this adherence, I have a great one. And you can get it for free. I mean, I'll send it to you if you send me a message or an email. Just let me know that you listened to episode 56 and that you want the macro tracker template, and I will happily send that your way. But thank you so much for listening to this episode, to this hopefully very valuable content for you to get some tactical knowledge. And I'll look forward to seeing you back here next week.